When it's done right and not horrifically overpriced, video game DLC can be an absolute treat. It's a really good reason to revisit a beloved game from a new lens or with different mechanics. I used to be somebody who would put a game down once the credits rolled and moved on, not really considering dipping back in for DLC. Then I played add-ons like Mass Effect's Lair of the Shadow Broker and The Witcher 3's Hearts of Stone and realized how wrong I was. Those aren't the DLCs we're setting the spotlight on today though. Instead, we'll be looking at the DLCs that you probably overlooked for one reason or another. Maybe because of when they released, maybe the game they spawned from was unpopular, or perhaps there was a different DLC for the same game that most people gravitated to instead. Whatever the reason, we're exacting some justice today and giving these DLCs the attention they sorely deserve. I'm Jess from WhatCulture, and here are the 10 most overlooked pieces of video game DLC. Number 10. Cold Cold Heart, Batman Arkham Origins. Now, if you haven't played these ones for yourself, you do not have to dig far into the internet to find out that the Batman Arkham games are very popular and for a very good reason. Batman Arkham Origins might not have been the most universally beloved entry, but it was solid. That said, its perception as one of the less impressive Batman Arkham games may have contributed to players missing out on some of its excellent DLC, namely the Cold Cold Heart DLC featuring none other than Mr. Freeze. The story DLC came 6 months after the release of the base game and called on players to aid the Dark Knight in his efforts to thwart Mr. Freeze's assault on Gotham City. The story, which is set a week after the events of the main game, is genuinely engrossing. Mr. Freeze's intro and backstory is cool, you'll add new equipment to Batman's arsenal, which freshens up the gameplay, and plenty of players found it was actually even more enjoyable than the main game. And yet, when the game arrived on Wii U, the planned port of the expansion was cancelled due to what they said was a lack of interest, so it's safe to say not enough people played this one. Number 9. Bad Blood, Watch Dogs. Watch Dogs had a shaky launch back in 2014 as one of the first victims of what we'll call the overhype train. People were way too excited for this, and while it delivered in a bunch of different areas, server issues and indications of graphical downgrading undermined the experience for some players. While that meant a bunch of players dropped off the game at various points, many more would have completely missed the Bad Blood DLC. The DLC released 4 months after the base game and puts you into the shoes of the eccentric hacker T-Bone instead of the original protagonist Aiden Pierce. Turns out this was a pretty good move, as it let the 10-mission long DLC take on a refreshingly lighter tone with an entertaining new protagonist. UB also added in a remote control car, which is a blast to use, and it's a wonder it didn't make it into the game proper. There are new weapons to use, plus additional perks and side missions, making this more of a good thing for those who liked Watch Dogs. Of course, given there was so much controversy over this game's launch, it's safe to say a ton of people would have missed out on this one. Number 8. Trespasser, Dragon Age Inquisition. Should Trespasser have been included in Inquisition, since it's basically the super important ending that Inquisition is meant to have but only arrived as paid DLC? Sure, but it's also a pack a lot of players missed out on since it was the last to be released and you'd be forgiven for having moved on by then. Inquisition had a lot of great DLC packs, from the smaller editions like the Black Emporium that let you pick up powerful items and alter their appearance, to the Jaws of Hakon that took place on a whole new map. Trespasser takes place several years after the events of the main game, and it basically explains why Solus disappeared at the end. Without spoiling anything, it covers some really important plot points. Apart from being imperative to the future of Dragon Age, this DLC also lets you dip back into hanging out with your buds and whoever you chose to romance, so that's pretty awesome given this game is riddled with great companions. It did come out almost a full year after the base game though, so if you, like me, had moved on by then, there's a good chance you missed this one. It really does sound like we have a while to wait until Dragon Age 4 arrives though, so if you haven't dug into this one and you want to, you've got time. Number 7. Ashes of Ariandel, Dark Souls 3. We're pretty spoiled for choice when it comes to excellent Souls DLCs, but as a result, that means they can't all get the equal recognition and spotlight that they deserve. For this entry, we're highlighting Dark Souls 3's Ashes of Ariandel. It might not be as big as some of the other Souls DLC packs, but it's a meaty little add-on with some sublime encounters, which gets unfortunately overshadowed by its hot younger sister, the Ringed City DLC. Don't let that put you off though, as it's more than worth it to pick up both DLCs, especially to see some of the gorgeous boss designs and meet new story-rich characters like Sister Fried and Father Ariandel. Ashes is also the beginning of the overarching DLC story, so you'd be doing yourself a disservice to skip it in favor of tucking right into the far lengthier Ringed City. Some Souls fans are also adamant that Ashes has the best boss in Dark Souls 3, so you might not want to skip this one. Number 6. Freedom Cry, Assassin's Creed Black Flag. There are a huge handful of Assassin's Creed DLCs that could be right at home on this list, from Syndicate's Jack the Ripper DLC to the Tyranny of King Washington from AC3, and both the Hidden Ones and Curse of the Pharaohs editions for Origins. While these are all criminally underplayed, we're going to be highlighting the Freedom Cry DLC from one of the best AC games ever made, Black Flag. Releasing only a couple of months after the base game, Freedom Cry casts you as Adewale, a former slave-turned-pirate who was Black Flag protagonist Edward Kenway's right-hand man. The DLC is set 15 years after the events of the base game and was celebrated for swapping a side character into the protagonist slot, its strong narrative, exciting new weaponry, and stunning soundtrack. The top-tier AC immersion you'd expect is well and truly here, and you feel like an absolute freaking hero because, well, you are. Weirdly, not enough people seem to be talking about this DLC, so we're doing our best here to change that. Number 5. MINERVA'S Den, BIOSHOCK 2. I put this one a little further up because if you like DLC, I'm betting you've already heard of MINERVA'S Den, but there's still loads of people who didn't play this one because it's attached to the least popular BioShock game. Adding to the inevitable sea of players who missed this one was the fact that it was the final piece of DLC that followed some significantly less interesting offerings, and it didn't arrive until over 6 months after BioShock 2 released. That said, if you did miss it then you really missed out because MINERVA'S Den is arguably one of the best DLC offerings ever made, like in video game history. It improves the combat system in really interesting ways, perfectly extends the main themes of the series in a surprising new direction, and delivers a wildly immersive narrative that you can't help but lose yourself in. The environments are as enchanting and horrifying as they've ever been, and if you're a BioShock fan who missed this one, you absolutely must check it out. This might be one of the few DLCs so powerful that it caused players to pick it up even if they didn't really want to play BioShock 2. But because of the fact that it's a very good DLC buried inside a less good game, we're still going to call it overlooked. Number 4. Survival, Tom Clancy's The Division. If The Division's jaw-dropping hype train moment where we watch the protagonist close a car door as they shifted across it while in cover changed your life, then you've probably played all the DLCs. If you just thought it was pretty cool, then maybe you missed out on The Division's second DLC called Survival. Survival threw you right into the frying pan with no gear and a nasty snowstorm to battle. It's a PvPvE mode where you'll basically be scrounging for clothes and equipment so you can hold your own against the environment, other agents, and hunters patrolling the game world. If that sounds pretty fun, that's because it really is. Needing to survive with limited time on the clock is a hell of a great vibe. It sort of takes everything that's good about Battle Royale modes and injects it with the tonally appropriate Division atmosphere to great effect. You can squad up with 4 players, it's wonderfully intense, and while the $15 price tag is arguably a little steep, the mechanics and challenge are so enjoyable you might find it all super worth it. It's as if the Division's full experience was poured into this little DLC pack and really distilled into its purest essence, and it works really well. If you haven't tried it or even heard of it, you might want to. Number 3. Overlord, Mass Effect 2. I wouldn't insult you by insisting you really check out the Lair of the Shadow Broker DLC because that's sufficiently rated as an excellent DLC offering. But Mass Effect does have Overlooked DLC, and one such example is Overlord. Perhaps because of the distraction of how good the Shadow Broker DLC was, Overlord may have received less attention than it deserved, but boy is it a good add-on. It explores a Cerberus research project that seems to control the Geth, and to put it lightly, this DLC goes places. The tone is legitimately creepy, you'll do a lot of planet exploring, and the dark narrative really grabs you. Not only that, but your choice at the end of the DLC will carry over into the next game, so that's pretty cool. There's also some visuals here that I really wish I could get out of my brain, but that is what it is. Number 2. The Season of Infamy, Batman Arkham Knight. We're back on Batman again, but it's for a very good reason, and that reason is, how cool are the Batman villains? Look, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. This one suffers from the TRESPASSER DLC controversy in that some players really feel like it should have been included in the main game from the jump, but given it didn't release until 6 months later, it's possible it just wasn't ready yet. The Season of Infamy DLC for Arkham Knight includes 4 missions with iconic villains: Wonderland featuring Mad Hatter, Beneath the Surface featuring Killer Croc, Shadow War featuring Ra's al Ghul, and In From the Cold featuring our old pal Mr. Freeze. Casting the spotlight on these iconic baddies is such a no-brainer, and fans love digging deeper into the villain stories and getting the opportunity to free roam the city. Each of them are so deep and engaging, they almost put the main game to shame, which does seem to be a trend on this list. Number 1. Mooncrash. Prey. I think it's fair to say that Arkane's 2017 FPS Prey is underrated and overlooked, so its fascinating Mooncrash DLC definitely qualifies. This separate game mode is a roguelike that randomizes the placement of enemies and weapons with each playthrough. You take on the role of Peter, a hacker tasked with learning how 5 people survived an attack on their moon base. He does this by taking the place of one of the survivors in a simulation. If it sounds a little confusing, it's Deathloop. This is just Deathloop before Deathloop was Deathloop. The goal is to help all 5 survivors escape within a single run, and you'll unlock them as you succeed with each escape. This DLC is brutally difficult, but in the most satisfying way. The challenge is absolutely addictive, it's gorgeously immersive, infinitely replayable, and a joy to take on. To sum it up, the gameplay takes everything that Arkane already nailed with the base game and makes it even better. There's progression to help you become more powerful from one run to the next, and classes that play quite differently. Weirdly, Bethesda barely promoted this one, and if it wasn't for a cult following that spawned from massive YouTubers shouting about just how good this game is, even fewer people would have tried their hand at it. If you still haven't checked this one out and you do enjoy Prey, it's an absolute must-play. That's it for this list, but do let me know down in that comment section if you can think of any other overlooked pieces of video game DLC. As always, I've been Jess from WhatCulture. Thank you so much for hanging out with me. If you like, you can come say hi to me on my Twitter account where I'm at Jess McDonald, but make sure you stay tuned to us here because we've got plenty more video game goodness for you.